Gender dysphoria, for the rare few people who have suffered it, is a condition of suffering. My question is, why on earth are we going out of our way to create even more of it?
It does sound like you're just replacing the FBI with the FBI.
Well, the problem is there's people who have worked there for decades.
In this video, we are going to watch Vivek Ramaswamy take on Chuck Todd, or as we're going to refer to him, Chucky. They're going to debate gender, cancel culture, and even shutting down the FBI. So it's an interesting one, and let's get into the first part, where Chucky comes in and really catches Vivek with some controversial bombshells.
Your rhetoric can sound uniting, and your answer just now, but then you say the following things. The trans movement has become a cult. We need to abandon climate religion in America. I definitely find the idea of systemic racism revolting. I say this, how do you square those statements with unification? These are divisive times. This is a polarizing time. We're pretty evenly divided on these cultural issues. How do you unite the country when you're essentially denigrating the views of half of the country?
Okay, so before we get Vivek's response on that, just quickly so my man Chucky here knows. Number one, the trans movement is culty. Number two, climate change is becoming a religion. Three, systemic racism and particularly race hustling and the peddling of race narratives is particularly revolting. Any sane human being with a functioning prefrontal cortex would look at these statements and, if not totally agree, understand that he has a point. But if Chucky is right, and if half the country do actually disagree with these things, then I feel very sorry for half the country. But I don't think that's the case, and let's have a look at Vivek's response.
I don't think I'm denigrating the views of half the country. I mean, let's take the touchiest of those subjects right now, on the trans issue. I think that when a kid says that I'm born into the wrong body, that my gender doesn't match my biological sex, more often than not, that is a case of a mental health disorder. That doesn't mean you disrespect that person. It means they're crying out for help. I met with two young women who regret the decisions they made, going through double mastectomies, one a hysterectomy, chemical intervention, now trying to teach kids across the country that when you're struggling inside, going through adolescence, yes, that involves some struggle. We live in a cultural moment today where adults are affirming that confusion rather than actually treating them compassionately. That's cruelty.
You ever talk to parents that have a kid who's going through this?
I have, actually. Yeah, and I think
it's a parent. My point is,
it's a difficult place to be. I acknowledge that. But what we need to do on both sides here is act with compassion, not really what makes us feel good about ourselves. And I think that's my main issue across our response to transgenderism and to climate. It's solving the actual underlying issues rather than what allows you to signal your virtue.
What makes it compassionate, though, to pass a law that denies a parent making their own health care decision for their kid? That's the part of this. That doesn't sound very conservative and small government to me.
Well, look, there isn't a state in this union that allows you to smoke an addictive cigarette before the age of 18, that allows you to get a tattoo before the age of 18. That's a body-altering change that a kid may later regret in life. So I think it is perfectly reasonable to say that if you're after 18 years old, you're free to decide whatever you want to do. That's what it means to live in a free country. But below the age of 18, I think it's perfectly legitimate to say that we won't allow genital mutilation or chemical castration through puberty blockers for the purpose of gender transition.
But how do you know it's that? Again, how do you know, are you confident that you know that gender is as binary as you're describing it? Are you confident that it isn't a spectrum?
I am.
You know this as a scientist?
Well, there's two X chromosomes if you're a woman, an X and a Y. That means you're a man.
There's a lot of scientific research out there. There's a lot of scientific research out there that says gender is a spectrum.
Chuck, I respectfully disagree. Gender dysphoria for most of our history, all the way through the DSM-5, has been characterized as a mental health disorder, and I don't think it's compassionate to affirm that. I think that's cruelty. When a kid is crying out for help, what they're asking for is, you got to ask the question of what else is going wrong at home? What else is going wrong at school? Let's be compassionate and get to the heart of that, rather than playing this game as though we're actually changing our medical understanding for the last 100 years.
I go back to this. If a parent is dealing with a child that has these, that may have these issues, trust me, the parent, the last thing they want to do is consider something like this. But if that is what they think could help their child pursue happiness, or they're not to kill themselves, why take away that option? Again, why shouldn't it be up to the parent?
So part of why parents now suddenly feel that way, let's ask ourselves that, Chuck, is we've created a culture that teaches parents that they're being bigoted or that they're bad people if they don't actually take those steps. So part of what I think is, listen, gender dysphoria, for the rare few people who have suffered it, is a condition of suffering. My question is, why on earth are we going out of our way to create even more of it? And there's no doubt that the cultural movement in this country, even education, is creating more gender dysphoria. If it's a condition of suffering, let's not create more of it. That's what we're doing.
Vivek nailed it. But don't you love it when you see these sort of establishment talking heads like Chucky on mainstream news platforms sitting there blatantly just drinking the narrative Kool-Aid, and they start saying things like, how do you know gender is binary and not on a spectrum, and talking about parents making healthcare decisions for their children. Come on, Chucky. Like, I sometimes wonder what is on these people's minds when they go to rest their heads on their pillow at night time and wonder what it's all for. Surely at some point you were a young, tenacious journalist with a twinkle in your eye. You were on your way up thinking, I could really make a dent in the world here and leave the world a better place than I found it. And I wonder when Chucky lost that twinkle, if I'm honest. At what point was the paycheck so irresistible that you started defending children having transition surgeries? But Vivek schooled him there, and thank God for that, because it genuinely concerns me when I see fully grown men sitting there defending this stuff, unable to draw a line and say, okay, hold up for a second. There is a problem here, and I'm going to try find some life in the area where my balls used to be and maybe not carry water for this particular agenda. And now onto the topic of cancel culture. But before we get there, guys, I do hope you take a quick second to like this video. I would really appreciate it if you are getting value. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I would love nothing more than to have you here permanently.
Don't ever leave me.
Ever.
Good. Because I'd find you.
Let me ask you about the idea of cancel culture, because I feel like the criticism that the right was making of the left 2 years ago, that it looks like some on the right are embracing cancel culture. I think Bud Light. I think about the transgender representative in Montana who was basically kicked, not allowed to speak on the floor. Do you think some of this is going too far?
So look, I'm an opponent of victimhood culture, cancel culture, you name it. I've written a book about this. I do think that the way the culture war ends is not with a bang, but with a whimper, where both sides get infected by those same norms.
So the right's been infected by this?
One of the things I say to conservative audiences across the country is we have to be the party of free speech and open debate. We can't be the party that says, I won't talk to, I'm here talking to you on NBC. There's other candidates in this race that say they won't talk to NBC News. Ron DeSantis is one of them. I go to college campuses where other candidates refuse to go. So I think we've got to practice what we preach. I'm in this race as a millennial, as a young person who's lived the American dream, to actually walk the walk when it comes to free speech and open debate. And yes, I would like to see other Republicans rise to that occasion and do better, starting with the debate stage in our own party this fall.
If Donald Trump doesn't do debates, will you not support him if he's a nominee?
Well, I'm not going to let him get away with that. Donald Trump...
What does that mean? What do you mean you're not going to let him get away with it? He
look,
can do what he wants to do.
I don't think the other candidates, including Donald Trump, are going to relish being on that debate stage with me. But I think that the way that he's shown in 2015, what people gave him credit for was that he was an outsider and a disruptor. I'm the outsider in this race. And I think that if you want to be part of, like Joe Biden, an existing establishment that doesn't want to debate, I think people are hungry for new blood.
What should the party use as leverage to force him to show up on the debate stage?
I think it's the voters. I think it's my job and it's the job of candidates to tell voters that if you want someone sitting across the table from Xi Jinping, if you want someone with the spine to take on the administrative state, it's the top of my domestic agenda, you better darn well not be scared to show up on a debate stage with the new challenger. Donald Trump did a great job of that in 2015. I'm the outsider in this race.
If there's one thing we need more of in the world, it is more debate and conversation. It's a way that bad ideas can die a public and humiliating death, and good ideas can rise to the top. And the only way for this to happen organically is to just have these honest debates whereby ideas can stand on their own merit. And if there's one thing that I would love to see, and that I would put aside whatever I was doing to watch it, it is the inevitable debate between Vivek Ramaswamy and Donald J. Trump. At the moment, there's a strange little friendship that they've got going on. Vivek is being very good to him and very loyal, and he's defending him in regards to the case, and genuinely seems like he wants Trump to run. What is happening right now reminds me of a season of Game of Thrones, where people will pretend to be friends so that they can ultimately defeat their enemies.
That's all the realm is now. Backstabbing and scheming and arse-licking and money-grubbing.
Knowing that they will eventually meet on the battlefield, or they will have to have the other person killed. Well, I mean, maybe in the Clintons' case. But in all seriousness, there can only be one king in the castle, ladies and gentlemen. There can only be one CEO in the boardroom. And I am fascinated to see how Trump plays this. Will he hit him with a nickname? Will he hit him with a lying Ted or a little Marco or a crooked Hillary or a Ron DeSanctimonious? He's already started pronouncing his last name wrong, calling him Ramaswamy, which is, I'm not going to lie, a bit of a chuckle. Or maybe Trump tries to big dog him with the handshake. Who knows, guys, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts. What do you think Trump is going to do? Leave it in the comments.
That is a bit of a head scratcher for me, is defund the FBI.
Yeah.
So if you
I didn't say defund the FBI. I said shut down the FBI and replace it with something new. Yeah.
So you want to shut down the FBI? What are you replacing it with?
I think it's a new apparatus built from scratch that actually respects the law instead of making it up. And the funny thing, Chuck, is if you look at over the last...
You think the FBI constantly is making up the law? That is a huge charge. They have just stopped major fentanyl. Been able to get rid of. I mean, there's a lot of work the FBI does, other than respond to complaints from elected officials who don't like investigations.
Well, actually, if you look over the course of the last 60 years, J. Edgar Hoover, what he did to Martin Luther King, that was an affront. It's still the J. Edgar Hoover FBI that people walk into down the street here in Washington, D.C. And I personally believe, as somebody who's running to actually run the executive branch of the government, when you have a bureaucracy whose culture becomes so ossified, every once in a while, you need to turn it over. And I think that, yes, we need federal law enforcement, but that institution has, in a bipartisan way, become so, I think, ossified in its own norms, in its own corruption, that we need to rebuild it from scratch and have something.
So you're going to replace the FBI with a new FBI?
Well, with a new institution built from scratch to carry out federal law enforcement, because the existing FBI, the people who work there, have worked there for so long that actually they're going to be getting in their own way. I think that that's actually important. And by the way, I also support
it does sound like you're just replacing the FBI with the FBI.
Well, the problem is there's people who have worked there for decades. And so what I say is, if I'm the U.S. president and I can't work for the federal government for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, then none of those bureaucrats reporting into me should either. That's the point I'm making.
On this topic of draining the swamp and getting rid of the FBI, I would be so fascinated to see how a president would go about actually trying to do this. When I hear these ideas, I think, yeah, it sounds good, but imagine being a president and coming in to the White House and saying, okay, now I'm going to shut down these agencies that have been going for decades and decades. It must be just the most entrenched bureaucracy, and you can imagine that these people would do absolutely anything to be able to keep their jobs and the subsequent benefits. The amount of manipulation and subversion that would inevitably take place if a president were to try and actually do this makes it seem like the time and energy just would not be worth it, and kind of not even worth speculating on. But hey, would be interesting to see somebody try. So with that, make sure you check me out on Locals, on Rumble, Instagram, all those fantastic places. If you guys want to watch another video, click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.